Hello, friends. Bienvenidos. My name is Jen, aka Jen Colo on social media, your local witchy friend and intuitive guide through the occult. As always, my lovely husband and co-host is David, aka Primriples on social media.
Hi, everyone. On today's Spotlight episode, Jen explains William Randolph Hearst.
Welcome to the show. Grab a chair, make yourself at home. Jen's got stories to share. You'll never feel alone.
All right, this is a unique episode. We actually went on a little field trip for this episode, which we've definitely recorded on site, and it's been successful. But this is a little different. We actually are breaking up this episode into the studio, and then you'll see us at another location. Podcasts are meant to be enjoyed mostly through audio, and we try our best to make sure that if you're not watching the video, you're not missing out. However, I am going to make the request that if you are listening to this episode, you actually do watch the video. And I'll make another little reminder as we move along, at least the latter half, because we have some cool images and we're on site. So, hopefully you can join us to watch that. But if not, the audio should do good as well. We are also going to switch up the format just a little bit for this episode because we, again, are going to go on site in a little bit. So we're going to actually talk about our comments first, and then we're going to get into the spotlight. So bring us in.
Yeah, so our first comment is for the alchemy episode. Actually, all of these comments and fact checks are for the alchemy episode, but this comment is from Jamie from Moonchild Crystal Shop. Her handle is at Jamie Lynn SQ, and she is also part of the Patreon Kythera Club loyalty program, where you can get 10% off your services if you are a cafe or tequila level member. So definitely worth checking her out, us out. But let's read her comment. She's also an avid listener. Highly appreciate her. She said, "I love this episode. Hands down my favorite one so far. Of course, the subject matter, but I also feel that David was having spiritual downloads throughout the whole episode. This was the best episode. I love it."
Awesome. Yeah, I'd love to kind of hear more details about what that means. I think I was definitely intrigued, and I responded to that comment where I kind of came in with one perception, but I learned a lot. And that happens consistently on this podcast where I don't know much about a topic. I think I have a general understanding, but the way you break things down really helps me understand, and in turn, I think helps the listeners understand. Again, we are having these conversations. And I've said this before, but I always forget that people are listening. So to me, it's just a candid learning conversation. But I feel like if I'm getting educated, then all our listeners are also learning some stuff. So that's always cool to see.
Yeah, a spiritual download is basically an epiphany. So that's what she means. You're having a lot of epiphanies.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. So the next comment, also about the alchemy episode, but about a specific part. She said, "Astrology is psychology." And then to that, I commented to that comment. I said, "Astrology and psychology both describe human experiences throughout life on the earth, and we use these tools to make sense of things, but they are sisters, not twins."
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think I clipped that where it said, it was that part where you're like, "I'm not a therapist, but..." Mm-hmm. So the engagement was great, and I think it opened up a discussion, which is also wonderful.
Yeah. Speaking of, the next comment is from at Mrs. Danny Loco, also Tipsy Hellcat. She said, quoting me, "I'm not a licensed therapist," unquote, "proceeds to read me for filth with startling accuracy." Yeah,
we love Danny. She always is so witty and super engaging with our content, which we really appreciate. She's also a really kick-ass bartender. Mm-hmm. Anything about a bartender, throw that notion out the window, because she is really, really impressive with her mixology and just everything she does. So definitely make sure to check her out. And if you have not checked out her episode, it's great.
Yes, she was also on the podcast. And then the final fact check, we mentioned what an atom is in the alchemy episode, but just to clarify, an atom is made of protons, neutrons, and electrons. Specifically, the nucleus is where the protons and neutrons are, and then the electrons are
on the outer field,
on the outer, roaming around, basically.
See, we do science here too.
Yes, we
like
do.
Bill Nye the Science Guy with a touch of magic, and I love it.
Yes, that's what I strive to be.
Yes. That's honestly that like last fact check is a perfect embodiment of what this podcast is, right? Because we talk about alchemy, which is mysticism, but we also talk about science and try to be as like faithful to reality as well.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm excited to dive into William Randolph Hearst. But before we do that, I want to know, since you did grow up in San Luis Obispo County, San Simeon is also in San Luis Obispo County, where his castle is.
Right. And this is Hearst Castle. It's not my castle.
Yes. David's castle. That would be cool. No, Hearst Castle. Tell us about your experience. Like, how did you learn about him? How do you feel about him? All of those things.
Right. Absolutely. So, I mean, I'm going to preface this. This is, our podcast. It's our point of views. It's our opinion. So it could be a contentious topic. And I know there's probably different people out there who have different feelings. Unlike the Edgar Allan Poe episode where I came in blind and had no expectation of who this person was, and at the end ended up not liking him. I am coming in with some bias into this episode. I'm not a big fan of William Randolph Hearst, and I think that he did more damage than he did good, and we'll kind of talk about those aspects. But growing up in the 805, I mean, there's a lot of like landmarks that you visit on field trips. We had a nuclear power plant called Diablo Canyon. That's like a pivotal field trip location that you go to if you grew up in the 805. And Hearst Castle was another one. So, if you went to elementary school in or around, San Luis Obispo County, most likely as a kiddo, you took a trip up to Hearst Castle and, through a kid's eyes on a field trip. You're a kid, right? You are obviously intrigued by some of the cool stuff that you get to see. There's tour guides, you're messing around with your friends. Maybe you're not as engaged with like the cultural or historical significance of it. But it's a field trip. So I went on that field trip and, obviously it is his location. They're going to paint a certain picture. I didn't really think anything of it. I want to say it might have been like 4th grade, like for sure elementary school. But I remember coming back from that field trip and telling one of my uncles, like, hey, like we went to Hearst Castle, just like any little kid would, and just sharing kind of what I had done. But he encouraged me to like learn about him, learn about like what he stood for, learn about who he was as a person. And I think as a kid, you don't really take those lessons into consideration. Like I'm sure you had that as a child where you're like, oh, the adults are talking, like whatever. I just wanted to go on a field trip. But this particular uncle did introduce me to like a lot of different knowledge-based things. Like he introduced me to Nietzsche. He introduced me to like Che Guevara. So he is like an ideologist, and I think he has a different perspective on the world. So I just vaguely in the back of my mind remember thinking like, oh, maybe there is more to this Hearst person. And, obviously we were presented with a good light for him when we went to the field trip. And it was an interesting, almost canon event or growing event where you like, maybe do question authority, or maybe you do question what you're being told, specifically in history, right? I'll talk about it a little bit more as the episode progresses, but victory or history is written by the victors. It's written by the people who have the power, have the control, and that's actually very apropos for this episode because he was a media mogul. So the narrative is told in one way, and reality, I think, can be interpreted in another way, but everybody has their opinion. So ultimately, I'm not a big fan of William Randolph Hearst. I think there was a lot of problematic things to what he did and what he stood for. And being from the 805, being from San Luis Obispo, that's maybe not an opinion that's held like by everyone. So not to be a contrarian, because I think I am pretty fair, but we'll learn about him and kind of understand where this is coming from specifically.
Yes. So we will get into it. I will provide as many facts as possible, and then we'll have our opinions. You can also make your own opinions, especially if you're from that area.
Right. And I do want to start like this isn't just like a hit piece or like talking shit. Like anytime we do a topic, we want to relate it back to the core of what we do. So I think that's actually a good starting place. Like, why are we choosing William Randolph Hearst on, on a basically mysticism podcast?
So he does have a lot of religious art within the castle, but also there is a surprising tie to psychic service providers and his granddaughter, which we will talk about in the end.
Yeah, and that honestly is a whole another episode. It was a really famous case with Patty Hearst. We mentioned her in a previous episode. I don't remember specifically which one, but that is kind of the tie-in. There was a lot of mysticism, and even like mysticism around him. It is rumored to the movie Citizen Kane is rumored to be loosely based on him, and if it's an old black and white movie, but if you've seen it, it kind of does paint him as this like almost like Hunchback of Notre Dame, just up in his like tower, like isolated. So I think it's appropriate for a podcast for sure. It's not just like let's talk shit about someone.
So let's get into it. William Randolph Hearst was born April 29th, 1863 in San Francisco.
1863, which is incredible, like the 1800s. So yeah. Well, honestly, probably one of our older spotlights. I think most of our spotlights have been like early to mid 1900s, right?
Yeah. Except for Edgar Allan Poe, maybe.
And Rasputin.
Yeah. Anyway, so he was born into a wealthy family. His father was Senator George Hearst of California. George Hearst, his father, was not a wealthy man. He was a humble Midwestern farmer. But then with the California gold rush, he came over to California. He struck it big. After that, he took the little fortune that he made and made it into a bigger fortune by investing in the right things like the stock market, silver, just different mining things. So after that, his wealth really exploded, and he only had one child, which was William. And funny enough, his father, George, or specifically talking about Senator George Hearst, he acquired the SF, the San Francisco Examiner, which is a newspaper, because he wagered with someone and that person couldn't pay their bet. So they paid the bet off by saying like, hey,
here's
do you
this
want
newspaper?
Yeah, basically I'll give you my company, I'll give you the newspaper. So that's how it got into the Hearst family.
What if we wagered the podcast, right? That would be the equivalent of me having poker night with my friends, and I run out of money or chips, and I'm like, I'll wager the Jen Explains podcast.
Oh my God. That would be interesting without Jen, but I guess you can take it over.
There's, I always have to reference it, but there is a King of the Hill episode where Hank Hill's boss, Buck Strickland, is put in a poker game, and he bets Hank, and he loses it, and then Hank has to go work for the competition, which is it was a really funny episode.
Oh my God. But yes, so that's how they acquired the newspaper. So William Hearst, born into this family. They also owned a lot of San Simeon, where Hearst Castle is, but Hearst Castle wasn't built for a while, but he would go there as a child. He would go camping. He really loved the views. Once you get on top of the hill, you have this beautiful ocean view. Like, how could you not fall in love with it? So he was really fond of it. His mom, she liked to travel, so she was a really big influence on him. She thought that her child should be cultured, so he had a tutor for the arts, and she took him around Europe to see the art for himself and to gain an appreciation from it. So he was a wealthy, worldly child.
Yeah. And nothing wrong with that. I think there's this misconception that nepotism is bad or wrong. I don't necessarily believe that. So I'm not mad at him.
Hold on, for semantics, nepotism is bad, but having privilege is not necessarily bad. Nepotism means that you are getting something unfairly because of your family connections. That's what nepotism means versus privilege.
Is it unfairly though? Because like, I don't know. Let's say, that's the definition. Okay.
Nepotism means unfairly, not by merits, but by connection.
Okay.
So nepotism is bad. Privilege is not necessarily bad.
Okay. Yeah. I'll retract that statement. But yes, I'm not an advocate against like people coming from privilege and seizing the opportunities. I have no problem with that, right? If we have kids, I don't want to give them every opportunity possible. Like the things maybe you and I struggled with growing up, that's not something I want for them to inherit. So that in itself, I don't think it's wrong. And I don't think giving your kiddos opportunity, if you have the means and the wealth to do it, absolutely nothing wrong with that. Right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he grew up and he asked his father, he was like, hey, I want to prove my worth, that I'm a hard worker. Let me take over the San Francisco Examiner. And his dad was like, okay, fine. I mean, we have it. We don't really do much with it. So sure.
He kind of just gave it to him, right? Mm-hmm. And was that, and you might get into this, but was that their only like publication or media at the time?
His father's, I think, well, he definitely was not the big media mogul that
Hearst ended up being.
Well, they're both Hearst,
I
but
guess, yeah.
William was, yeah. So that wasn't his dad's main jam,
right?
So he was just like, sure,
like take it, essentially.
Yeah, like I don't know why you want it, but go ahead. And then that's when William Hearst really exploded as this media mogul, because he was the original tabloid. What is it called? Yellow journalism. It's a very infamous thing. He realized that sex and controversy sell.
He weaponized the media, right?
Yeah,
and at that time, like, newspapers were media. So maybe now we think about it like, oh, we're scrolling through our phone, or like we listen to like TikTokers or podcasters. But yeah, he was the original. And at this point, it was like, it was an institution, right? So even now, we've spoken about this. We've spoken about, like, yes, there's no more gatekeepers anymore. We can sit behind a camera and a microphone and a phone and kind of just say what we want to say. But that doesn't always guarantee that it's going to be heard by the masses. In this case, it was a guarantee that it was going to be heard by the masses because it was like an official publication. Yeah,
so before newspapers or media outlets were more owned by somebody local or from around there, and journalism was just this happened and this happened and this happened. So he really started to change things by starting off with the San Francisco Examiner, and then after that really trying to do a big emphasis on more crime, sex, innuendos, and like catchy headlines, and also being politically one-sided. So it's like, whoever is in my best interest, I'm going to boost them, and whoever is against my best interest, I'm going to knock them down. So having that biased media take was very, very new. And then also starting to own a lot of different media outlets that basically said the same thing really set us up for where we are now, where a lot of the news outlets are basically, if you look back, owned by like one person, two people. It's very like concentrated. It's like same thing.
Conglomerate, essentially. We might need to fact check this, but I think he may have been investigated for a monopoly. I could be wrong on that, but I want to say, so he would... I think he would buy out like smaller publications, and eventually he kind of just owned all of it, essentially.
Well, he definitely did that, but was he investigated? We will have to fact check.
Yeah. And this is, I mean, we're talking the same heights of like Carnegie, we're talking the same heights as like Ford, like these people who were really like powerhouses and rich, influential people at the time. So he wasn't just like some rinky-dink like newspaper owner. Like he really, really had influences on the masses, and you'll kind of see that a little bit as we progress to the episode in the kind of the company he kept as well.
Because of the sensationalism, the newspapers were really flying off the shelves. Yeah. And so he started, I mean, he already had money from his family.
The original clickbait?
Yes, really the original clickbait.
Yeah.
So with that success, like you said, he did acquire different outlets. At his peak, he acquired 30 different newspaper outlets, and he eventually expanded to magazines and became one of the largest media moguls in the world.
Yeah.
30 was a lot for that time, like before the age of the internet, where it's like, I'm just gonna buy it, take over the domain, and then like publish the same thing in a different font. 30 physical outlets was a lot. So,
and I mean, just to give you an example of the caliber of people he was rubbing elbows with. The founder of Bank of America was like a friend of his or an acquaintance that went up to the castle and visited him. Like, these are the types of people he was like interacting with.
Yeah. Are you sure it was the Bank of America?
Yeah, because it started as the Bank of Italy, and then he like did the Bank of America.
Yes, you're right. I forgot about that. Yeah.
So big hitters for sure.
Yeah, a lot of celebrities, Charlie Chaplin, people like that.
Now, I want to ask you something. We're obviously not at the level of Hearst, but I mean, I guess you could call what we do entertainment and journalism. What is like, and we're not, definitely at that level, but like, let's take a moment to dream, right? What would be our parameters and the thing that like keeps us grounded? Because I think most people think themselves as like good people and think they would never do anything like to harm people. But like, what are those times where maybe, especially in a situation of ours where we do have a podcast and it's growing and, we're getting engagement, like, where does the responsibility, liability, and then like the groundness come to keep, entertainment, media, journalism, sound?
Yeah, I think we've had a few instances with this podcast, especially around cultural practices, where I'm like, I don't want to just research and be like, this was my book report on, for example, hoodoo and voodoo. Like, I just really do not feel comfortable with that. Like, I would rather get an expert for the experience exchange or something. Like, I don't want to do that. Yeah. So I think just my ethics around like cultural appropriation versus appreciation is one thing. Another thing is with my horoscope, sometimes I really think through like, how general am I being versus like how hyper specific can I be? And I can't make an individual horoscope for everyone that reads it weekly. If you want something that specialized, you do have to get a reading with me. Yeah. But for example, we had the Jupiter-Venus conjunction, and a lot of astrologers were hyping it up, being like, it is the best day of the year. It's so lucky, like buy a lotto ticket. But it didn't manifest that way for a lot of people. And a lot of people were getting frustrated. And then I explained to folks, it's because there was this square, which is a tension point, to Chiron, which is wounds of the past. But that's not sexy journalism. That's not sexy astrology. So people didn't want to talk about that. Right. But I did talk about that in my horoscope. Yeah. So I did say there is an opportunity here, but it comes with a pain point. Right. So,
and the reason I bring that up is because I don't want to sit in hypocrisy of like, we're here talking about someone who has parallels to, obviously what we do, but it's just that self-accountability, right? And we are the owners and we don't answer to anyone, but sometimes I feel like you have to hold yourself to a higher standard if you're just answering to yourself. And at this point, I do feel like we have a responsibility to our listeners. We've had a lot of wonderful guests, and the last thing I would want to do is like throw a wrench in everything and discredit our podcast or ourselves, because a lot of people have shared their time and their energy with us. So that's why I bring it up.
Yeah. Definitely have to have ethics when you do any sort of work.
Right.
Yeah. He got himself elected as a member of the U.S. House of Representatives, which, you can buy an election. For the most part, you can buy attention, is what I will say. Yeah. Like, there are a lot of billion.
But attention is such a currency. I mean, we see it now, right? Like, we're bidding for people's attention. The reason why social media is quote unquote free is because that's what we're selling, right? Or that's what we're paying with, is our attention and our information.
Yeah, and at this point, we are monetized through Meta platforms, which is cool because it's like, it's not a lot. It's nothing life-changing. It's like $30 a month, but it's still like great. We can reinvest this into the podcast. We can improve our setup like this. Yeah. We could pay for a bill or two because we are a whole legitimate production. Yeah. But yeah, it's a little scary. Like, wow, people's like views equals this money. Like, whoa.
And even with this episode, as we were driving here to the studio, I mean, I just... the fact that like now we've been able to do this episode, like this was a whole production, right? Planning, scripts, visiting, paying for museum entries or the entry for the castle. Like, it is a whole production, right? This is no longer like, yeah, let's just sit down in a microphone and talk. So we're getting a little off tangent, but I do want to just like call it out with the parallels.
Yeah. So you have to have ethics when you have a platform.
Well, you don't have to, but you should.
You should.
But I say that like, you gotta chuckle, it's jokingly, but like, unfortunately, I feel like that is a reality, right? You don't have to do anything. You should, but there's a lot of cases from Hearst's day to today where it's like, yeah, you should, but you don't have to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So he unfortunately had some misinformed opinions. Even though they're opinions, I will say they are misinformed and straight up wrong.
Yeah, they're wrong. We're not going to be apologetics. Like they were wrong.
They were wrong.
You can almost with certainty say they were objectively wrong. But.
Yes. So he did start off very liberal leaning and then quickly slipped to independent and then far right.
Yeah.
So at one point he used his newspapers during the end of World War I, which was about 1918, and he started shifting far right, and then World War II happened shortly after, and he was a Nazi sympathizer, and he called Hitler the savior of Europe.
Yeah, a little troublesome, and he wasn't the only one in the U.S. saying and doing that, so I don't want to like say that he was a maverick in that. I mean, there's instances of Ford, there's instances of Walt Disney, like it's not just him, but it's just not great that he did that. Especially, he didn't get to where he was without like the help and support of all the people around him, the natives to the California land, all the people that ran his production, his conglomerate. And not to say that he didn't work hard, because I'm also not going to discredit like what it takes to run a successful media company, but he was born with a silver spoon, which again is fine. But just to be so irresponsible with that power, I think that's where the seepings of like his wrongdoing start to really weigh on who he was as a person. And that's kind of going back to the beginning of the episode where I start having issues with him.
Yeah, a lot of folks have issues with him, obviously, for being a Nazi sympathizer, for building on Chumash land. Granted, his father was the one that bought all of that territory and property, but it is on Chumash land. Like, it was originally the Chumash people's land. It was beautiful.
Yeah. And honestly, that I can't... Yes, it's horrible, and yes, like, obviously there was a lot of, like, bloodshed and not okay, but, again, going back to the hypocrisy of it, like, we can't stand here and say, like, we're not living on, land that wasn't originally ours. Where I do have a little bit of a problem, and this is more personal, this is more of an opinion, you'll see later on, like, the opulence and all the cultures he, like, took inspiration from. This motherfucker had so much land, like he couldn't have one thing that symbolized like the natives of the land in the castle. That kind of rubbed me the wrong way, because it's like, dude, like you're over here not stealing, but taking inspiration from like European like arts and all these great works of ancient Greek and Roman and even Egyptian artistry. And you couldn't do anything for the local land that you're literally on. So that did rub me a little bit the wrong way. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe he had local plants, I want to say.
Plants. But I mean, you'll see the opulence of like how this dude lived. And then like, I think that's where that's coming from in my regards.
Yeah. So he did poorly manage his finances. His nicknames were Wasteful Willie and the Great Accumulator.
Yeah.
And I will explain in his astrology why he was hardwired this way. But yes, he poorly mismanaged his finances because he gave in to a lot of whims, and eventually media started being not as popular in the traditional ways that he was getting into it. So he had to liquidate most of his assets during the Great Depression.
Yeah. And I mean, when it comes down to it, it's like he was just a petulant child. That's what it was, right? He was... Well, I don't want to say he never got told no, because he did get told no, but we'll kind of touch that a little bit in the astrology. But he was a petulant child, right? He had like, I want this. Oh, it's shiny. Let me take it. And he kind of ran with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And even when he set up the castle, like as you're going up the castle, it's like a 5-6 mile ride up the mountain, up the hill. Well, the manager of the ranch, of the living quarters, lived at the base of the hill. He didn't even like, he had so much room up there. It's not like he didn't, but he couldn't even have the like decency to build the help quarters essentially up in the castle. They had to be at the base. The other thing is like, for how much it's said that he appreciated the land, like he had to knock down all these great trees and all this nature. When we went on the tour guide, they said like some of those trees were like hundreds of years old, and he just like knocked them down to make room for what it was. Yeah.
I do want to say, I think they said that he moved them, not that he knocked them down.
No, he tore some down.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
We'll have to fact
and like,
check.
if you see it, like, there's no way he didn't have to disrupt the land. Like, he had to have.
Yeah.
You know, he's moving like columns and towers and water and infrastructure to like a natural spot. Like, there was damage done for sure.
That's true. Yeah.
And I think, honestly, for me, one of like the final points that is, I think, ultimately one of the things that really irks me is that the narrative is changed. The narrative is being formatted, or has been formatted in a way, because he's been gone for a while, where they kind of now post-humorous made him seem is that the right word?
Posthumous?
Posthumous. They made him seem like he was a conservationist, and he was not a conservationist. He just wanted a lot of shit. At the end, like the Hearst Foundation ended up donating it, I think, to the California parks. And now the narrative is like, well, he was just a conservationist and he appreciated culture, and like his dream was to like conserve like these things. That was not his dream. No.
Yeah, he maybe said that he wanted a museum of things, but it's like a museum to show off, not necessarily like a museum for, you know, little kids to go on a field trip necessarily.
Right,
or like just for anyone to go up there and be like, what's up here? It was like to flex.
Exactly. So, yeah, history is written how some people need to write it, but I think it's important to have those conversations of like, this is also what happened.
Yes, so he did liquidate a lot of his assets during the Great Depression. He kept Hearst Castle, he kept the land, but everything else he downsized pretty much. And then he ended up passing away. He stayed at Hearst Castle until a week or two before his death, when he had to go seek more medical attention in Los Angeles. But he died August 14th, 1951 at 88 years old.
Yeah. I don't know. It's also sad. I do think after knowing about Hearst, getting immersed again into the history, the one sympathy I do have is I think he was lonely. I mean, he was married, had kids, like, you know, he had people that cared and loved for him. But just the way he went out of his way to impress these people, like they mentioned that he had a big yearning and a love for Hollywood, which was like, you know, down the street in LA. And he would send, when he had guests from Hollywood, like Marilyn Monroe, come visit him, or Charlie Chaplin, he would add a private train car to the train in LA, so it was all glammed out. They would take it to San Luis Obispo, and then from there, like, his private driver would drive like the celebrity up to the castle. So he was very big on like ensuring that powerful people were around him. But I did get a sense that he was like lonely or unfulfilled, or needed that like affection from rich and powerful people to validate who he was as a person.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, after his death, the castle was given to the California parks, and it became open to the public in June of 1958. It has about 750,000 visitors annually.
Wow.
Yeah. And the Hearst family still owns like the wider estate, and they've gotten into cattle farming now.
It's always been a farm, I think, right?
Yeah, but that's more of their main jam. So 82,000 acres are under a land conservation agreement, which is why people credit him with being a conservationist, but a lot of these decisions were made after he passed.
Right.
By his estate, not necessarily by him. So that's where we kind of
PR management right there.
Yeah, that's where we kind of call into it, like how much of this was him, how much of this was PR. I'm not just going to believe what the sentiment is, you know? Yeah. So why the heck are we bringing him up? Because I truly believe that if you're on the extremes of wealth or poverty, you're more likely to believe in the supernatural compared to the middle class. And let me tell you why this is my hot take. When you are poor and disadvantaged, you need something to cling onto spiritually to explain why you're suffering and why you won't suffer in the future if you just believe. So those folks are more likely to, believe in like God or the supernatural or something like that. And then the folks that are really, really wealthy, it's like, well, how did I strike it big without necessarily having to work so hard? It's a blessing from God, or I am chosen by God. And then the middle class, they don't
have time for that.
Yeah, they don't have time for that because they're working, and they know that, if I eat or if I don't, that's all up to me. So I don't have facts. This is all vibes and what I've seen, but I think that the middle class is more likely to be a little more skeptical than the extremes.
Yeah.
So why do I mention this now? Because when his granddaughter, Patty Hearst, was kidnapped, they used psychics to try to figure out where she was.
Yeah.
And a lot of rich and powerful people do work with psychics, astrologers, just people of the occult. And I know that is one criticism of, folks that are not celebrities. It's like they're all evil and they sign deals with the devil. That's how they got famous. I don't believe that part, but I do believe that there is a fascination with the occult on both extremes, because both extremes may be more likely to be interested in spirituality and things like that.
And on a more pragmatic level, right? It's like, if you have the money and the wealth, like, you're going to try everything, right? So you can be like, well, we've used the police, we use science, we've used forensics, but like, let's try the occult, psychics, and cold readings. Yeah,
so we talked about Patty Hearst getting kidnapped in a previous episode, but Patty Hearst got kidnapped by a far left movement called the Symbionese Liberation Army. She was kidnapped for about 19 months. And they couldn't locate her. They thought it was weird that she was brainwashed into robbing banks and doing all of these things. And both ends of that equation believed in psychics, or tried psychic things, her family and then her kidnappers. So her family asked the psychics, like, can you tap in and see where she is so we can go rescue her? Then there's another sort of spin-off conspiracy theory that it was very much like a metagame, where it's like, let's put an ad out for psychics, and maybe one of these people associated with the terrorist group will pretend to be a psychic so they could wow us, and then we know that if they know so much, they're affiliated. So we don't know for sure, but of the deep research that I could find, those are two trains of thoughts, that they either believed in psychics or they didn't believe in psychics, but they were hoping for that to be like a honeypot or a trap for someone of the terrorist group to approach the family.
Everybody was just like, psychics all around. They're the answer to everything.
Yeah. But then her captors were also believers in psychics, and they said, we know that psychics are looking for you, so do not think about getting rescued, because almost like a cell phone tower, they're gonna ping like, she is within this area because she is thinking, get me out of here.
They're gonna triangulate her location.
So they were like, be in the present, be grounded, like, believe or think that psychics are not allowed in your bubble. They're not allowed to invade your third eye. Like, don't let psychics tap into you. That is a direct order. Yeah. So I thought there are interesting ties to the occult if you look for them.
Right. Awesome. Well, this is the portion where we're going to go on site. So we're going to say bye right here from the studio. If you're listening to this right now, I would recommend this is a good time to switch over to video, because we do have some cool imagery to go along with the rest of the episode. Come join us on site.
I'm bringing you this special astrology spotlight in San Simeon right in front of me. You can't see it, but it's the beautiful ocean, California coast. And then right over here pretty small on top of the hill is Hearst Castle, which is anything but small. You actually have to go take a bus up there, which we did. We took a tour and we took some beautiful pictures that we're excited to share with you guys. All right, so let's dive into the astrology. William Randolph Hearst, we have an A rating. So this is really great. That means that we have an accurate time from a birth chart from a primary source. So let's get into it. He was born April 29th, 1863 at 5:58 a.m. in San Francisco, California. So he is a native Californian. So his sun, he is a Taurus sun, a Virgo moon, and a Taurus rising. So triple earth energies. So very concerned with physical matters, as we can see from Hearst Castle. So one of the first things that I was really excited for when we visited Hearst Castle is to see if we could pinpoint some of his astrology from the architecture. It's really difficult to analyze people's taste post-mortem because most people don't have like a living statue or some sort of like physical legacy. Most people's legacies are more intangible, but he absolutely has a physical legacy. So I'm excited to jump into it. So the first thing that we noticed is one of his quotes where he inherited pretty much a lot of Simeon, several acres from his father. And it was his favorite place in the world. He would go camping there. But eventually, once he reached about, I want to say 49 or 50, he was like, you know, I want something a little more comfortable. That is a direct quote. So then he went to the architect, Julia Morgan, and he said, I want something a little more comfortable than literally camping or glamping. Like, I'm too old for this. And that's when his little something more comfortable came to be Hearst Castle. So literally so Taurus coded. Taurus is concerned with, you know, being comfortable more than anything. So Taurus is ruled by Venus. Venus wants pleasurable experiences. Its sibling sign is Libra. Libra cares more about the aesthetics, where it's like, even if I'm uncomfortable, I need to look good. Even if the food tastes bland, it has to be Instagrammable. Taurus is the opposite of that. It's like, I need to feel comfortable first. I don't care about what other people think. I need to like it. So similarly, he would have these beautiful meals in this dining hall, but even though he would have these great steaks and things like that, he would still have a bunch of condiments. That's something that the tour guide mentioned. Like, as you can see in this image, he has like ketchup and mustard, and it's like, who puts ketchup on a steak? Apparently sometimes he wants to, and again, very Taurus coded. Tauruses don't care that it doesn't make sense to other people. It makes sense to them and their palate. So I thought that was kind of funny to see. And those bottles are original. So I thought it was so cool to have that preservation. He also has his moon in Virgo, and specifically the moon in the 5th house. So the moon can represent the mother, and his mother was a really big influence on him. So his mother actually thought, you know, it's very important for my child to be like a Renaissance man, very well-rounded, to not just understand the practical math and sciences, but to also have that art background and to ultimately just be cultured, period. So his mom actually got him an art tutor that taught him about art and all of those beautiful things. And she actually took him to Europe a few times to go look at like art IRL. And so that really influenced what fun and pleasure was to him. Again, the 5th house of joys, hobbies, pleasure, etc. The moon can also show us what we collect. So even if you're a minimalist, you collect something. Like there's something that you want to have more than another thing. The moon collects the sun's light, which is why it lights up. So this is where you can see someone's hobbies, someone's collection. Because it's in the 5th house, he just wants to collect anything that is pleasing. It's like, if I like it, I want it, and I'm just gonna take it. It doesn't have to make sense. So all around we see like Spanish influence, Italian influence, like we even have Egyptian influence, as you can see with this deity Sekhmet. It is such a beautiful statue fountain. She is the daughter of Ra and a protection goddess. And you know me, I gravitate towards protection goddesses. Like my breath was taken away with how beautiful this fountain was. The tour guide said that they put lotuses there because in Egyptian mythology, lotuses represent the sun, creation. It was absolutely breathtaking. So I could see why he was like, I don't care that most of my art is more European centric. I'm gonna take this Egyptian beautiful statue, and it's about like 3,000 years old. So the fact that back in the early 1900s, he was able to, 1, buy it, 2, preserve it, and 3, have it shipped from Egypt to California all the way up that hill was absolutely wild. Something else that the tour guide told us that was very fascinating was that around 1922, if I have the date correct, is when they found King Tut's tomb. And so there was like an Egyptian revival and everyone was fascinated with Egyptian stuff. So that probably had a little bit to do with that influence of, I want this. So that was very cool to see. We also have this, or what we noticed with him, his main house, there were a lot of little houses. There were like the workers' quarters, there were guest houses. His house was called Casa Grande, the big house. Of course, he has to have the biggest house. And again, with just collecting things that are pleasing to him, his Casa Grande had not just 1, but 2 bell towers. So why would a house need 1 bell tower, let alone 2? Doesn't matter. It doesn't have to make sense. It made sense to him. That made him happy. Something else, his nickname was Wasteful Willie because his tastes always changed. And I was not surprised to hear that because he has Venus conjunct Uranus in the 2nd house of Gemini. So let's break down all of those elements. So Venus likes art, likes gold and expensive things. Uranus is very fickle. Gemini is already a fickle sign that's like, I like a little bit of everything. So when you combine all of these things together in the 2nd house of finances and values, yeah, money was no object to serve his tastes. So that's what he did. He spent money and he was like, I want to move it a little bit to the left. I don't care that it's going to cost tens of thousands of dollars. That's just what I'm going to do. So this pool that you see was supposed to be a simple rose garden with a reflective pool. Instead, it became the Grand Neptune pool. And a lot of the stone that you see was shipped also from Europe. And he had Neptune moved like a few times and eventually was like, we're just going to yeet Neptune onto this roof and I think he'll stay there. Something else that was very interesting was that technically Hearst Castle is not complete. Like all the way up to his death, he was making changes. So when post-mortem it was donated to the California State Parks, they were like, we're not going to touch anything because we don't want to assume what he was going to change. We're just going to preserve what was already there and like leave it alone. So that was very interesting. In terms of his career, what we could tell, he was, like we mentioned in the first half of the episode, one of the biggest media moguls of the time. And that's no surprise because in his astrology, in the 1st house, we have the sun, which is your ego, your mission, your drive, conjunct Pluto, which is about power, dominance, and Mercury, which is about communication in the 1st house of self and identity. When you have 3 planets within 10 degrees in the same sign, that's called a stellium. So he had a 1st house stellium. So it's no surprise that he was one of the biggest media moguls in history. And he was able to really dominate the competition for a long, long time. As you can see in this picture, there are some tapestries. There were like 4 or 5 in that room. And he said that tapestries are the headlines of the time. So he really saw media and art as like one and the same. Like there is an art to having media outlets or to being a storyteller of the news. So that was very important to him in his career. He also has the North Node in Sagittarius in the 8th house. First, let's break down. The North Node is also called the Dragon's Head, and it's sort of your unconscious North Node, like your driving force. You don't necessarily know why you want to move forward in that direction, you just do. So, because it's the North Node in Sagittarius, Sagittarius is the philosopher, the traveler, is very open-minded. That's why he just liked to collect and learn about different cultures. In this picture, he collected all of these flags of a European horse race that actually still goes on today. But he was like, yeah, I just want one of every flag, even though this decor has nothing to do with the rest of the decor in the room. Like, I just think it's cool to have a piece of history and a piece of that part of Europe. So I definitely see the North Node in Sagittarius influence there. So the second part of that, the North Node in the 8th house. So when you have sort of a larger planet or aspect in the 8th house, it could show a big inheritance. He received 2 large inheritances from his parents. So as we mentioned earlier in the episode, his dad did have humble beginnings as a Midwesterner farmer and then turned miner, hit it big in the gold rush, invested really well in silver, and he was born with a silver spoon for sure. Then his dad passed away. The inheritance went to his mom, which was unusual at the time. It usually went to the eldest son, but it did go to the mom. And wasteful Willie kept asking his mom, pretty please, can I make my something more comfortable up the hill, my casa grande, my castle? And she said no. There's actually a letter between his mom and one of her friends that said, I'm concerned about my son basically blowing his inheritance or being wasteful. I just know my son. And she didn't let him during her lifetime do any construction. It wasn't until she passed and he gained the inheritance to all this land, which belonged to first his dad, then his mom, then him. That's when he started constructing things. So definitely a big destiny point having to do with an inheritance. Something else that I noticed that was very interesting is that he has Jupiter in the 6th house. The 6th house can also represent pets and farmsteading. He had so many pets. He had exotic animals. He had basically his own zoo, but he also had his own farm. So he grew his own meat. He had cows, he had fowl, he had poultry. Right across the street was the ocean if he wanted some fish. From his cows, from his poultry, he collected the animal-based items like eggs, milk, cheese, and then he had fruit trees everywhere. So he didn't really need to go out and buy too many things. He pretty much had it all right there, really like farm to table. As you can see in this picture, the table was very opulent, but a lot of the things were quote unquote like grown from his hands, or I guess from his workers' hands, but he had something to do in the process of like feeding himself, which I don't know, I thought was really cool because Jupiter is a planet of expansion and abundance, and he really had the ability to feed himself and his guests from his property. Towards the end of his days, he did have some financial troubles. We already know that he has Venus conjunct Uranus in the 2nd house. So while that could work to your advantage, if you're not careful, Uranus is fickle, and it shows that you can run into financial trouble, which because he mismanaged, because that conjunction is square his moon in the 5th house, like his whims got away from him, and eventually he did have to sell a lot of things, donate a lot of things. Like he donated his animals because he could no longer like properly take care of his exotic animals. But the one thing that he did not let go of until post-mortem was Hearst Castle. He stayed there pretty much until he died. And then finally, he has Saturn opposing Neptune, and Neptune is in his 12th house of hidden enemies, and it could also be illusion, delusion. So I'm very curious if he was always paranoid of the other shoe dropping, or that maybe people were out to get him. I noticed there was a lot of like occult protection imagery. So we saw Sekhmet, the goddess of protection, and her fountain. Then after that, we have the Spanish wildmen that you saw at the entrance of Casa Grande. Those were also meant to be for protection. And then just a lot of like angels and gargoyles everywhere. So it could have just been for aesthetic, European aesthetic, sure. But I'm curious if subconsciously he was also like, this is a good protection ward. It was so fascinating to do this report, to see Hearst Castle in the flesh, IRL, and to really see this astrology in a physical form. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining this very special spotlight episode on the Jen Explains podcast. We'll see you later. Bye.